Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 32, Episode 2. Coming up on this show, we've got the Phantom Gamma Ray Trail, catching a case of the shadow orbs, and the life-saving gargoyle. I'm your host, Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
It's really uncomfortable. It itches, and you go to the doctor, and you get a rash, and it's embarrassing. Like you don't want a case of the shadow orbs.
It does sound like a weird STD or something. The case of the shadow orbs.
Technically, it kind of is.
Oh,
It's not necessarily sexually transmitted. Let's put that to the side for a moment. It might be, but I don't think so. This is actually an extension of the Hitchhiker hypothesis, which we're going to be going into for this show.
Oh, the idea that if you're messing with this dark paranormal phenomena, it latches onto you and everyone in your circle.
Everyone else. And it's funny because everyone knows everything about epidemiology after the pandemic now. So you might know the whole R system, like R0. So how much, once you contract something, how many other people do you give it to? What's the factor? So the R0 factor for paranormal phenomena apparently has been statistically worked out to be a factor of R0 factor of 3. So it means for every single person that engages in paranormal phenomena, they will pass the Hitchhiker Effect onto up to 3 other people.
That's bizarre.
It's really bizarre.
Who's done this research?
Okay, so we're going to be getting into that.
Lee Brickley.
No.
From his underground base.
No, that's like R2. Like every person who has a weird encounter gets a pentagram on their back. No, it's a little bit different to this. This is really fascinating. This really got me intrigued today. And it all started because of Jazz Shaw when he was writing an article on our website. And he was talking about an experience he had after encountering a couple of UFOs around his family home. And it just
He's written a couple of articles this month.
Yeah, it's really great. And it really led me down this path of research, actual scientific research, which has gone into the Hitchhiker Effect and paranormal phenomena. And I'm just trying to pull up my notes here, but I've got the wrong one open. But this relates to the research of Jim Segalia. Now, Jim Segalia is a really fascinating individual in that he's collected a bunch of, remote sensing devices or sensing devices. And these devices can detect, changes in gravitational waves. Gamma radiation is a really important one, electromagnetic phenomena. And he's deployed 27 of these devices throughout the Unitah Basin, which of course is known to be connected to the Skinwalker Ranch and all the high strangeness which is going on there. And he has statistically analyzed environmental changes in the electromagnetic spectrum that correlate with phenomena. So we're going to get into that in a moment.
Interesting. Heat maps coming up?
Well, I won't be showing you any heat maps, but I will be showing you a lot of graphs. So this is don't worry, I'm not going to subject you to a whole heap of stats, but that kind of stuff will be coming up.
Yeah, cool.
But we're going to be talking about shadow monkeys and weird bedroom invaders and a whole range of stuff like that. But before we do that, what have you got coming up?
I picked up this new book called My Paranormal Life by Dan Harari.
Oh, this is the Gargoyle guy.
Yeah, this is why I mentioned this Guardian Gargoyle at the start of the show. I picked it up for the cover. This is the coolest comic book style cover I've seen in a long time. And there's a, flying UFO blasting a beam out of it. There's some weird angel in the top right, but there's this gargoyle to the left of the UFO. And it opens with this incredible story. I may as well tell you a little bit of it before we go into your segment. This guy, one of his earliest memories, he was the Jewish family in New Jersey. They were the only Jewish family in the neighborhood. And he's kind of an awkward kid and, didn't make friends easily. But one day these 2 kind of cute Catholic girls came over, he said, and they invited him out to play. So he begs his mom. He's like, please let me go out and play with these girls. And his mom says yes, and out they go to play in the neighborhood. And these 2 girls, they kind of take him to this nearby store. It's like a general store or something. And there's this billboard in the parking lot that advertises the store. And the girls start swinging on the bars for the structure of the billboard.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, come on, Dan, climb up with us. And he's like, all right. Starts climbing. And he said, they're kind of swinging around it like gymnasts, like they've done it a million times.
Sure.
He's getting kind of nervous, but he likes these girls, so he's climbing further to the top.
How old is he?
He's like, 5 or 6 in this story, right? And he eventually climbs near to the top, and one of the girls turns to him and says, hey, Dan, and blows him a kiss. And he, because of the shock of this, he's like, whoa, he starts falling back. And all he remembers is seeing their faces and him falling. I don't know how tall it would have been, but pretty tall.
High enough for a 5-year-old.
And he doesn't remember the impact. He doesn't actually remember hitting the ground. And he just assumes he thudded into the ground. But what he remembers is waking up in some strange house. Like he thought it was obviously still in the same neighborhood, but he didn't recognize the living room. He was on some weird couch. And when he wakes up, he's like, am I dead? Is this the afterlife? Like, what is going on? And in this room he's in, he can see the front door going off the living room.
What, out into the street?
Yeah, and he looks up and there's this like 6 or 7 foot tall, hideous creature. He said its skin was like a weird kind of mottled, leathery gray. And it had stubs on its back, on the back of these huge shoulders. It had wings and like a classic kind of...
Like a gargoyle.
Like a gargoyle face. And he said this thing turned and looked at him and gave him this look of disgust, as if, like, what am I even doing here? Like, it's such a waste of time. And it went through his mind that this thing just saved me. Like, he just picked up this thought that it had saved him from this fall and placed him in this room. And he watched it kind of give this huff and walk out the front door.
Is he sure that he hasn't just been watching too much of Disney's Gargoyles?
He's like, I swear this is true. I remember it like it was yesterday. He said, I can still picture this thing's face in my mind. And he left the house and somehow, he doesn't quite remember, somehow he made it home. And he swears to this day this was a real experience. Now, what got me interested in this story...
You mean apart from a gargoyle rescuing a kid falling from a billboard?
Obviously, I'm going to do a gargoyle story. But he prefaces this with a little bit of his background, and he says that, look, growing up, my father worked for the military on secret military projects. And as soon as I read
every single time.
Look, I know if you're new to this show and you're new to these topics, you might be like, what the hell are you talking about? What does that have to do with anything? Well, we've noticed this trend over the 17 years we've been doing this. People that have these really strange, odd paranormal experiences, very especially alien abductions, quite often, there must be some statistical, nudging towards this. Their father, in most cases, is involved in the military in some form, especially with classified projects. So this opened up this whole story because ultimately he gets to what he discovered that his father was working on. And it wasn't until after his father's death that he discovered just how deep into the, black world of the military that his father was involved in.
This is quite crazy. Like it's amazing just how often, and we hear it so often that it becomes common, but each time I'm surprised by it because it's again this validation. You're right, Ben. It's like there's this weird connection between family members in high-level military programs and then having strange encounters. It's almost part, in a way, of the contagion phenomenon, of the Hitchhiker Effect as well. Because guess what's happening? You've got these high-level people that are high-level in the military, that are in classified programs, dealing with this kind of stuff. Well, guess what they're doing? They're picking up the phenomenon and they're bringing it home to their families. So what you're describing, Ben, is actually a hitchhiker phenomenon.
Yeah, you're right. And Nick Redfern had a famous story about Desiree Shaw and her father after her father died, Frank Shaw. Frank Shaw was an archivist who worked at NASA. And there's that famous story. He was at the Texas Johnson Space Center in the 1980s, was working really late one night, which he often did. And as he was leaving the car park, he claimed he looked up and perched on the side of the building was, he said, a humanoid figure, seemed to be dressed in a dark black cape. And he said it had wings. It looked like a kind of gargoyle perched there on the edge of the building.
Where was I reading that? Hang on.
Now, his daughter, the memory from his daughter is that he came home this night and his mother was like, her mother said to her father, what on earth happened? Because he was as white as a ghost, shaking, absolutely terrified. And he really just broke down in front of his daughter and his wife and explained, yeah, I saw this creature. And they're like, don't tell anyone at work. Do not tell anyone about this. Do not mention it. And he's like, yeah, you're probably right. I shouldn't talk about this.
Well, you think they instinctually knew that was just something not to...
It's crazy, right? Like you can't mention this when you work at NASA. You can't tell your bosses that you saw a gargoyle. Anyway, he does this. He doesn't mention anyone. One of the details he spoke about was this creature. It relished the fear. When he saw it, it recognized that he had seen it. Redfern reported that she remembers her father saying it relished him being terrified at this sight of it. And so he didn't mention it for weeks until finally it was just eating him up inside. And he pulled his boss his supervisor aside, who was a good friend of his, trusted him, and confided in him and said, look, I saw something really strange a couple of weeks ago. And this supervisor of his said, there's already a file on it.
Wow. Yeah.
And the reason there was already a file on it is because prior to his sighting, they had found 2 German shepherds in that same car park, whether they were security dogs or pets, I don't know. But they had been mutilated, drained of blood. And apparently there was already a file circulating with the NASA security about this incident. And other people had supposedly seen it as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that story because I didn't recall that today. But when I was looking into this, in fact, there was an article that was published by Colm Kelleher. It was a while ago. We covered it on the show, but I'll link to it in the show notes so you can go and check it out. But there was this element in here that I was just reading through. I wasn't going to even include it on the show. But the fact that you've said this, like you've got people that are working once again in the military-industrial complex, experiencing these entities. One thing that comes up with the hitchhiker phenomenon, and we'll get into the full details if you're new to this of exactly what it is and what people experience. But just keep in your mind as we start this, that this is essentially, it's still in a sense, a living organism. And in that last show, when we were talking about the Men in Black, what do these things want to do? They all need to consume something to be able to sustain themselves in this reality. We eat food. These entities from other dimensions consume energy. That seems to be the case of what's occurring. And so what they do is they sometimes get that energy from blood, hence why there was drained corpses of those German shepherds, perhaps, or they drain fear and energy. And maybe that's why it was relishing in the fear that was coming. It was because it was feeding. It was feeding on this kind of thing. But there was some research that was being conducted back in 1973 with Uri Geller. And you had a bunch of, high-level military-industrial complex scientists that were connected to the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And they were conducting these experiments with Geller to see, what they could get out of it. Now, I don't know the exact details of what those experiments were, but obviously psychokinetic experiments. But in doing so, you had a bunch of people that were connected with this that basically started having strange paranormal experiences in their homes. But one of the recurring themes was there was one particular person, I think it was author Jim Schnabel.
Didn't one of them see dinosaur footprints or something, or a giant bird?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. But the bird is really important because there was one, you're absolutely right, Ben, where he received a phone call from his wife because his wife was freaked out because they'd experienced what would appear to be a large raven-like bird that was flying through the yards of several members of the group. It wasn't just one. And when I'm talking about I'm not talking about just a large standard bird. I'm talking about a paranormal,
like Thunderbird,
non-earthly Thunderbird style kind of thing. And these birds show up again and again. I'm like, why do they have wings? What's going on there? So that might become a little bit more apparent as we travel through this. So look, I'm looking forward to that coming up in the Plus extension.
Oh, well, most of the book is his sex stories, sex escapades after the age of 65. So
great for Plus. That's fantastic. We haven't done a sexy story in a while.
There's a Gargoyle story. Then there's all his post-65-year-old conquests. Great segment coming up.
Maybe it's because I'm getting older, but it's just like it doesn't have the same appeal as it did all those years ago, Ben.
He gives them all nicknames. One of them is called like Thunder Chungus at the end or something. It's a pretty funny guy. He's kind of like a paranormal Larry David. So I'm looking forward to Plus.
Okay. All right. So let's return to something just a little bit more, professional before we head into the sexy stuff. Although, as I was saying, maybe this stuff is sexually transmitted, because another thing that I noticed is actually the whole lover's lane phenomenon, right? So this is the other thing that seems to occur. Speaking about the consumption of energy, if you look through a collection of reports that are seemingly isolated, the reports that have no connection to one another, this common theme seems to pop up of what is known as the lover's lane paranormal phenomena, or the lover's lane ghosts. A lot of the time it's where you've got a young couple, a nubile couple that don't have anywhere to go, so of course they go out into the wilderness, or they go and park their cars and they go to isolated locations. Funnily enough, apparently a lot of people were having sex in their cars near the TNT lot where Mothman first sprung up. So it's like, what's going on here? But there seems to be this reoccurring theme where people are engaging in this amorous activity, and perhaps it's generating some type of energy, whether it's orgone, who knows?
Orgone.
Who knows what it is? Like, it's something, right? And this energy seems to attract these interdimensional creatures because there's plenty of stories out there of people encountering birds is one that fly over the roof of their car and scratch the roof of their, but giant birds. You've got
Bigfoot.
Tapping
on the window.
Yeah, there was like Jonathan Downs reported this one where it wasn't in a car, but there have been ones. There have been ones.
Yeah,
you're totally right. Where they're getting it on in the car and they think that there's someone outside, so they stop and turn around and there's Bigfoot sitting there, just like looking in, enjoying himself. I'm surprised he didn't have popcorn.
Enjoying himself.
Yeah, well, very much enjoying himself. But Jonathan Downs actually reported on this as well, of where there were a collection of reports coming out of the wilderness in the UK where he noticed that, and Jonathan Downs, excellent researcher at putting things together, but in some of these locations, people were going and they were engaging in sex. And as they did, there was this one story that really stood out, is that there was literally a Bigfoot that would materialize every time people engaged in sex. And one woman took her boyfriend. She's like, I know
at foreplay or post-coitus?
I think it sounds
in what point in the interaction does he appear?
It sounds like it started. I don't think Jonathan Downs did the exact point where the Bigfoot appeared. But I don't know if Bigfoot tapped the guy on the shoulder. It was like, who knows what's going on? But there was this one story which was really fascinating in the sense that this girl had invited a boyfriend to go out and they were just about to engage in coitus interruptus. And as they did, she looks over her shoulder. She's like, oh my God, we have to stop. There's this weird guy wearing a gorilla costume who's looking at us.
Yeah.
And then they realize that this is a 9-foot tall, heavily built, thick set, no-necked creature that's absolutely not a man in a suit. It's a Bigfoot that's materialized. And of course, they start to freak out. And what happens? The thing disappears. It just goes. So it's like this whole energy thing that's going on. But of course, then from these stories of lovers' lanes, they have these, not in this particular one with Bigfoot, but there are multitudes of people that have these encounters. They see these things, and guess what happens? They go home, and then they start having paranormal experiences in their homes. Never had it before.
Yeah.
Never had any type of activity. They're not inclined to have these experiences. Never had an experience when they're a child. They encounter one of these things out in the woods, and then all of a sudden, it's in their home because it's come with them. It's followed them. So this is where we get into the Hitchhiker Effect. And it happens to anyone who engages with the paranormal. Anyway, even you listening right now, in a minor sense, may start to be more inclined to have these experiences because without a doubt, most people that engage with the paranormal, whether they're talking about it, playing with the Ouija boards, ghost hunting, doing whatever, see a UFO, they seem to have follow-up experiences which then seem to explode the more that they engage with them. A great example, of course, Jazz Shaw, he had this write-up called Animals from the Shadow World. I'll link to it in the show notes so you can read the full details yourself.
But
the gist of this story is like, look, between November of 2020 and August of 2021, my wife and I witnessed 5 UFOs, some of which we filmed. Now, look, with no shade at all on Jazz, he's a really lovely guy. The videos are just a light in the sky. It's like, it must have been, and I understand because I've had my own experiences of seeing a UFO, and when you record it, it just looks like a speck of light in the sky. But at the time, it's truly incredible, right? So he filmed these UFOs, but to have 5 UFOs flying over your house, most people have 1. 5 is quite considerable. And of course, it's 2020. He's already been in the paranormal field for a while. So for him to have this experience is a precursor to this Hitchhiker Effect. Well, he says, look, it was the spring of 2021 where a different phenomenon began showing up much closer to home. And in fact, more accurately, I should say it was showing up in our home, right? Now, he's saying, look, I'll leave it up to the discretion of the reader or the listener in this circumstance to work out whether or not the two occurrences are related. But it is interesting that this seems to coincide with the concept of the Hitchhiker Effect. Now, normally with the Hitchhiker Effect, what's really important to stand out is the Hitchhiker Effect tends to be more negative. It tends to be when someone, according to some researchers, like Colm Kelleher, is that if they're more negative or if you've kind of disrespected a space or a location, that can sometimes increase the effect of what's occurring. And we'll get into that as well. But he says, look, one evening I was climbing the steps to the second floor of our home. This is Jazz. And I saw what appeared to be a black house cat in our hallway. Now, he said he noticed that it ran into their bathroom. But what was strange about it is that it was featureless, appearing to be composed of shadows. And he said he hurried to actually look in the bathroom to see what this thing was. And of course, there was nothing there. And he shrugged off this incident because he had 2 black cats. Right. And this is the funny thing as well. It's almost like this is something that John Keel said many, many years ago, is that the phenomenon is reflective. So what it does, but this actually might be more poignant than we realize. What it does, the phenomenon, the intelligence behind the phenomenon, it's almost like it can read your mind. It's almost like it understands your circumstances. And what it does when it starts out, it just starts out subtly doing things to you. And this is a great example of it with Jazz, because he's already got 2 house cats. So of course, you're just going to brush this off and go, oh, I must be,
I've been up too late. I'm a bit tired.
Yeah,
whatever.
What's going, I mean, the fact that it's, coincidentally after you've been seeing UFOs, don't worry about it. But he does, continue. And he says, look, a few weeks later, the same thing happened. But this time it was on the steps leading down to our basement. And these brief sightings continued every few weeks. Like this was a recurring theme that was going on. But a few weeks, I guess, it's not that common that you're going to get too stressed about it. But obviously it was enough, because by the time it happened a 4th time, he's like, I'm not saying anything to my wife because I don't want to appear any crazier than I already am. But once it happened, like to the 4th time, he's like, okay, this is weird. He walks into his living room. He's just seen this black shadowy cat that doesn't kind of look like a cat. It's a featureless form run down the stairs into his basement. His 2 cats are in his living room.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, right. His wife, obviously, and when you're married to someone, they know. They know when there's something up. His wife says to him, look, there's something amiss. What's wrong? And he says, well, reluctantly, I spilled the entire story to her, worrying that she would be frightened that her spouse had finally lost his mind. But instead, this broad smile comes across her face. She's like, oh, you saw the ghost cat. And it turns out that she too had been seeing this phantom shadow-like cat creature that was hanging around the house, but didn't say anything because she didn't want to alarm Jazz. And I'm like, okay. It's fascinating how it's almost like the phenomenon in a way as well plays people off against each other. It creates this strange atmosphere where it heightens the kind of mood because you're stressed about your partner finding out what's going on, they're stressed. Like it just changes the dynamics. And I think there's something to that. I think that allows more of this stuff to come through. It's why it starts small. It starts simply. So I'm going to follow up with Jazz to see.
Wait, so this doesn't ramp up to a gargoyle in his bathroom?
No, nothing
this
like.
Is just a ghost cat story.
Just a ghost cat, right? That's all it is. Like there's nothing else going on.
Jazz is fired. Finished.
Well, the thing is, it's only from this point. Like I know it's a couple of years ago now, but I'm like, it's only really just started. Like I wonder if you start engaging with it a little bit more, is it going to become a little bit more unsettling?
This better be part 1 in a series that culminates in Bigfoot appearing in his bathroom or something.
Which is exclusively published by Mysterious Universe. Yeah, absolutely. But he says, look, he started looking around the internet to see if, people were describing similar experiences. And indeed they are. There's like a whole heap of sites out there that report this. So I'll link to one of them where people are describing their black shadow dog experiences. He says, look, there's this one online outfit that features a large collection of stories and reports from people who've had similar experiences and are seeking explanations. He says one man reported being out front of his home in the evening, taking in the night air when he spotted a shadowy dog figure on the side of the street. He called out to it and it turned its head to look at him with what he described as red glowing eyes before charging at him. He bolted into his house but said he heard it slam into the mailbox. The next morning, he claimed to find bite marks and a dent in the mailbox.
There's a Shadow Animals book. Aaron, you got a whole show of ghost cat stories right there. Hours of ghost cat stories.
This is the thing, right? For a lot of these experiences, it's just like, yeah, I saw a ghost cat. Like, it's like, that these are the small innocuous creatures.
Sorry, I almost fell off the edge of my seat there. Sorry.
Yeah, like these are what I think to be almost like, because we don't see it in the West, but I consider these to be like Miyazaki, kami type of creatures. Like they're all around, and yeah, you'll just encounter them, and there's not anything that's necessarily negative about them. Mm. But in saying that, they're almost like the concept of the gizmo and the gremlin. It's like you get this kind of cute shadow house cat that's hanging around. It's fine as long as you don't feed it after midnight or get it wet. But once you start engaging with it, which is the equivalent of getting it wet, then you get the gremlins.
Yeah, you're right. His wife had the right attitude of, just a ghost cat.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's like people go, oh, you're just being too negative about this. It's like, no, I'm not being too negative about this because there's just been too many reports of people that, have these experiences that start off completely innocuous and then it completely destroys their lives because what's going on, it wants to drain people. They want to survive. They want to be able to manifest in our reality. And doing so, they have to draw energy from somewhere. They're not pulling it from your Tesla battery. They're pulling it from you. They're pulling it from whatever the energy is that we create. And then this starts crossing over into things that are wild, like implants. Like I was looking into some of the research recently of Dr. Lear, And, we know Dr. Lear's research quite well, but with him, he was dealing with abductees who were, reporting that they were having recall of having implants after alien abductions. One guy came to him because he'd been, working in his garage, and when he's working in his garage, he hit his thumb with a hammer. And when he hit his thumb with his hammer, it's like something moved. And he's like, this is kind of weird. So he goes and gets an x-ray. And when he gets an x-ray, they find this strange grain of rice-shaped kind of thing, growth, that's under the skin. And it was only because he'd hit it with a hammer that it seemingly had affected it, brought it to his attention. And so Dr. Lear...
Was it artificial?
Yeah, it was artificial. Well, it appears to be artificial. Of course, there's a whole heap of contention as to what these things are. Some people say they're, calcium growths, that kind of stuff. But they're a lot of the time, these things that they pull out, and I think Dr. Lear pulled out, I think it was 16 implants out of 17 people. I don't know how that math works out, but apparently maybe they were looking for one. Because even he said that he noticed a couple of things. One, that he tried to pull out, it's almost like it came to life. It started avoiding his surgical implements, like it was moving about. There was another one where they pulled it and they broke it when they pulled it out. It reassembled. Now, I know that's starting to become a little bit, Linda Moulton Howe. Remember her describing the instrument where scientists picked it up and it scooped out the guy's eyeball and they cauterized it. Like that classic story, right? So I'm like, I don't think we're going that far.
That's the risk you take when you work on reverse engineering alien technology. It could scoop out your eyeball at any moment.
Yeah, and then cauterize it.
It's all booby trapped.
Yeah. So, but with the reason why I bring up the implant stuff, right, is that one thing Lear started to speculate about is, well, how are these things powered? Because they were made of, metals and materials that shouldn't be in the human body, or at least should only be in very small quantities. And of course, when you look at the isotopic analyses, it demonstrated that in some circumstances, I don't know if it was Lear, but in other circumstances, it was like the isotopic ratio suggests that the material hasn't even come from Earth. It's not terrestrial. It's come from somewhere else, suggesting it's either come from a meteorite or it's been manufactured off-world. But the thing that really stood out about it was that he came to the belief that it was actually drawing upon energy from the human body. But what energy source was, he doesn't know. No one knows what that energy source was.
Orgone.
Well, I wonder, is there some, and could it be that extraterrestrials or whoever these entities are that are implanting these things, they can see this energy. They know exactly what it is. And that's how they utilize it. Like they're using it for these implants to track, but also in some circumstances, control people.
I read another one of Nick Redfern's classic implant stories today.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, from his NASA Conspiracy Files book.
Yeah.
It's the one from, you probably know this, Bruce Weaver. His grandfather worked at Brooks Air Force Base in the 1960s, and apparently his grandfather was really tight friends with Major General Theodore Bedwell Jr. And one day Bedwell Jr. told Bruce Weaver's grandfather that a close colleague of his, who also worked at the base, read this classified report, saw a bunch of colored photographs on the recovery of something that was secured by NASA security personnel at the John H. Glenn Research Center at Lewis Field in Ohio. And as he's going through this document, he realizes the description. The description is a 9-foot-tall, muscle-bound, ape-like, human-like creature.
So it's a Bigfoot.
Covered in hair. And he was, the night before this body was recovered, the security of the base was seeing these little orbs flying everywhere, like flying all over the forest near the base. And according to the story, they managed to retrieve this body that was already there. It was already dead. But according to the report, this creature had 32 teeth, as human beings do. The vocal cords seemed very human-like in appearance. But strangest of all, according to Weaver, this is what his grandfather told him that was reported to this guy that allegedly read it at the base. In the beast's lower left arm was embedded this small metallic device, and the specialists that did the autopsy on it removed it and believed it was some kind of transmitter or tracker. It was clearly an artificial object. The report said it had been transferred to be viewed by some foreign technology division, and that's the end of the story. No one knows what happened to it, or what happened to the body, or what happened to the device. But that was just it's just one of those classic insane stories out there.
It is, yeah. I mean, you're right. It's one of those stories, but sometimes it's just so insane that there might be a kernel of truth to it. Like there might be something to it, especially when you start connecting it with other stories. And coincidentally, like I wasn't going to go into it, but I just happened to be looking at old footage from Dr. Stephen Greer. Yes, I know, just like We'll just move on
What?
from that.
He's buff, dude.
Well,
He's buff.
Yeah, but it's not that. It's just that he thinks that all aliens are now good and everything's okay, when it's absolutely not the case at all. But he was interviewing back in 2000, or maybe a little bit earlier than that. He was talking to William Porelek. Is it Porelek? And he was a government contractor whistleblower who made some pretty outrageous claims. He said that it starts to look like it's actually true now as well. It's a small element of it. He says, look, doesn't matter if you're whatever party you're voting for, it's completely irrelevant. And of course, some of us already know that. But this goes well beyond the people that control the world. They're known as the Four Horsemen. It's four independent groups that are warring against each other, utilizing us as pawns. And they're the ones that control the world, and they're the ones that, basically have control over everything. And what he started talking about is he said, look, he started working with access control to these high-level military facilities. Like, that was actually his business. This is why he was a contractor. And through his role, and I can't remember exactly what was going on, but essentially he got caught up in dealing with scientists. And in fact, a scientist from the University of New South Wales here in Australia, I believe, this is another one of these scientists that just gets a massive amount of funding and disappears, because he'd developed a way to imprint serial numbers and radio receivers into some type of metallic chip.
Oh, that's right.
That could be inserted under the skin.
Yeah, this was a great story. We reported on this years ago.
Yeah, and with it, when he was doing his research, essentially they found that not only could they receive a signal, like basically to receive an identifier of some kind, if you put a small antenna on it somehow, you could pick it up from like 120 miles away, like out in space. This is how crazy it was. And this military group came along, this shady kind of group, and was like, we want to produce billions of these.
Yeah, that's right. There was an order for billions of them. Then
billions.
the guy just disappeared.
The guy just disappeared, right? And what this started to tie in with was this idea that these chips could be utilized to induce certain electromagnetic frequencies into people's brains. And what could that do? That could control people, right? I'm like, well, this is going back to this Bigfoot story, as crazy it is, was the chip that was inside him, whatever this intelligence is, whoever these groups are they like controlling their muscle? Is that what this Bigfoot was?
Speaking of muscle, have you seen the aliens that Stephen Grew's been in contact with?
Oh, here we go. All right.
Where are they? Incredibly buff aliens.
There's something subtly, disturbingly homoerotic about that stuff. It's a bit not casting shade upon him at all.
Come and join my intergalactic boys club. Yes.
There are rumors, but that's for another day. I'm not talking about Stephen Greer. I'm just saying in general, there are rumors. So, I'm going to get sued. So anyway.
We're not suggesting anything.
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm not talking about Stephen Greer. I'm just saying out in the field. So let's go back though. Like, we've kind of taken this diversion, but actually keep the implant stuff in mind for later on, because this actually, plays a role into the research of what I'm going to be talking about from Segala and Jim Segala. But look, the one thing that's happening with these stories, if we go back to like Jazz's experience, is this stuff, as much as it seems to be etheric, it seems to be a ghostly apparition, there's physicality to it. There's some physical manifestation of it. And that was highlighted in the story of this dog, this fiery red glowing-eyed dog that smacked into the mailbox. It left a dent. It physically affected the reality around it, but then also disappeared. Another woman reported sightings of multiple featureless shadow dogs inside her mother's house, which would constantly run into the bathroom and disappear. And Jazz, raises the question, well, what's it with these shadow animals in bathrooms? And I'm like, straight away, jinn.
Oh, yeah.
Because where do the jinn hang out? If you look at the work, bathrooms. You look at the work of Rosemary Ellen Guiley and others, they've found that it seems like jinn, for whatever reason, hang out in bathrooms. Who knows what's going on there? So I'll link to Jazz's article. And of course,
and Shadow Animals, the book.
Probably not Shadow Animals.
326 pages.
Are there that many shadow animals out there?
Explores the lessons of a wide variety of shadow animals.
Look, shadow animals,
including horses,
have been around for a while. Jason Offit also has published articles on this kind of stuff. He reported something very similar. He said, the cat under my feet almost made me stumble. I grabbed the wall so I wouldn't land face first on my living room floor, and the dark figure skittered away out of the corner of my eye. Now, he said our cat Smokey had the habit of walking under my feet, but when I turned to find Smokey, he wasn't running away as I'd seen. He was asleep on my couch. So it's like this recurring theme of they're not...
Dude, where is my freaking soundboard? Where is my soundboard?
Look, I'm setting the scene with these things, right? Because it's just like a ghost cat. Like, really, who cares? Like, if you're having the experience, cool, but like overall, who cares? It becomes stranger though when you start going into the hitchhiker hypothesis. So, in a bunch of people that have had the hitchhiker effect, where they've previously had no paranormal experiences, but their husband or partners are out working at military sites that are looking into paranormal phenomena. There was one woman that reported that she saw like what appeared to be this huge black mass like heading towards her. Like she was just shocked. She couldn't make out what it was until she realized that this black mass, it had 4 paws and it was like running. So it was like a black dog, but only the paws could be seen and the rest of it was this black cloud.
Okay, that's pretty weird.
Like it's getting weird. It's almost like it didn't fully materialize.
It's just a lazy ghost.
Yeah.
Suddenly manifesting its paws.
Had it not had enough fear? Is that what was going on? Had it not had enough energy to somehow manifest in our reality? And then you've got stories like the demon cat of Washington, D.C., for where more than 100 years, during presidential elections or national tragedies, people report seeing this large black cat that will grow to the size of a lion disappearing in mid-pounce. There's plenty of these stories out there. But then we start crossing into the things of like the ravens, right? This recurring theme of these bird-like entities. And you have the researcher Elliot O'Donnell, and he published a book many, many years ago. It was like in the late 1800s, maybe early 1900s. He lived for a very long time. But the book was called Ghost Animals, not the one that you previously put up, Ben.
Ghost Animals.
A little bit different. But he reveals this story of a Captain Morgan. And apparently Captain Morgan was this vivacious gentleman who arrived in London in 1841. And he arrived at a lodging house, and it was this old-fashioned kind of hotel. And the room that he slept in had all this heavy antique furniture in it. I mean, antique even for 1841, but it was reminiscent of the days of King George I. And apparently this is one of the worst periods in modern English history for crime. Now, despite the grimly suggestive surroundings, he wrote, Captain Morgan quickly got into his bed and was soon asleep. He was abruptly awakened by the sound of flapping, and when he looked up, he saw a huge black bird with outstretched wings and fiery red eyes perched on the rail of the edge of the 4-poster bed. So pretty shocking, to experience something like this, but you would think, well, if I've just woken up, I must be having a dream. I must still be dreaming. He wasn't, because this creature flew at him and attacked him, endeavoring to peck out his eyes. Like it was trying to get to his, I didn't achieve its goal, but it starts trying to do this, and he gets into a struggle with this thing. He's punching this bird. He's like around, there's feathers flying everywhere. You can hear this flapping sound, rah, rah, these red eyes going everywhere. He's beating the hell out of this bird. It's just not going down. Finally, he flung this thing off, and it like kind of fell to the corner of the room, and he grabs the doona and goes running and like throws it over the top of the thing, trying to capture it. And right before he's like looking at it, like he can see it. He said this thing had like a regard of horror. Like it was just absolutely terrible, this thing. And as he throws his doona and himself following it on top of this thing, rather than feeling the bird, it just crumples into nothingness. Like it's just gone. It was physical. There was no doubt about it that this thing, was physical and that he experienced it, but somehow it dematerialized. It lost its form. It demolecularized and was gone. Now, the following morning, he's asked by one of the housemaids, how was your sleep? And he's like, there's a fucking ghost bird in my house, in my room. Like, what's going on? She's like, oh, yes, don't worry about it. He's like, no, he just noped the hell out of there. He got the hell out of there. But this is like a recurring theme. There's plenty of these sorts of stories of where people have these encounters with these phantom ravens. Like, how did he get this? What, is it just simply that this room was inhabited by a phantom raven? Was it connected to him?
Is this Captain Morgan the same Captain Morgan from Captain Morgan's Rum? Which is notoriously cursed.
Are you implying that he'd had too much of this rum and was blind drunk?
He does have his own rum brand.
I don't believe it's the same Captain Morgan, but you never know. But then, there's similar reports as well. There's more modern reports. There was an eyewitness from Seattle who claims that they were violently assaulted on separate occasions by what he describes as a black blob, but it was almost like a blurry, limbless rat, which seems to have no good intentions towards him and was intent on harming him.
This is Miyazaki.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. He says, I was asleep this particular night, but was suddenly awakened, and when I awoke, I found on my arms that they were feeling completely numb, but there was this odd thumping sensation on the inside fold of my right elbow. I looked down, and in my astonishment, I saw that there was a pulsating black, dark blob there, almost like it was leeching on him,
God.
feeding on him. He said, and it was what it was doing. It was so draining him. He said it was like a limbless, blurry rat that was trying to headbutt its way into my arm, pulsating rapidly. And he's like, what the hell is this? Like, he screams out, this thing jumps from limb to limb to limb. And because his limbs are feeling numb, it's like it's incapacitated him.
I told you that story I read years ago. I've mentioned it a couple of times on the show, where it was a guy who was trying to get rid of his attachment to lust. He was trying to break free of lust. And he was working on it. It got to a point where he felt like he had conquered it, where he'd overcome this test and, refused a girl or, did something to overcome this desire. And he said at that moment, as he broke the attachment, this blob-like, just like you're describing, this rat creature scuttered out of his body and ran across the bedroom and disappeared into a wall opposite his bed.
This is why Nancy Pelosi AI porn is so popular at the moment. It's like these rat-like entities that are getting into people. Well, this is crazy. It sounds very similar, right? This thing was trying to get into him. So it was like, had he somehow brought it into the apartment? Was it already there? There's not enough information.
But I mean, Robert Monroe's spoken about this in his out-of-body travels, as have other people that have those experiences where they report these, jellyfish-like creatures floating around, feeding off people.
Well, I include this story, though, because it has a hitchhiker effect to it, right? This is where it starts tying into most of the time when people have an experience like this, where they wake up, it's not really recurring. It's not common that these things are recurring for a lot of people. In some circumstances they are, but it's not the majority. But he says that, look, everything was fine. His life had calmed down. He had left Seattle and moved to Kansas. He was doing fine. And he said he was staying with family in Kansas when he was once again sleeping. He awakens, it's such a long time after. He finds that his neck is now numb and something is pulsating at it. He immediately glances over his left shoulder to see the same dark blob doing the same pulsating headbutt attack on the side of his neck, trying to get into him.
Ugh.
He said, but this time the blob was significantly larger than the year before. I immediately started swatting at my neck frantically and managed to dislodge this thing. I was able to see it fall onto my bed as I was already standing upright, and I managed to track its movements onto the floor where it ran under some clothes. I tried to follow it, and then it just simply disappeared. And I'm like, okay.
I'm trying to see if there's a blob rat yokai.
Well, the thing about it, though, is like what stood out for me is that this thing followed him, right? But not only did it follow him, it was bigger. So I'm like, has this thing been feeding on him the entire year and he just didn't wake up? Like every other time, well, he's woken up once, but every other time it's managed to be able to just take a little bit off him and grow, because he said it was substantially bigger. And this time getting into his neck. Yeah, the arachnid yokai, they pop up every now and again. What's that one called? Ushioni?
Ushioni. It looks like a spider demon.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as I said before, Miyazaki is, in My Neighbor Totoro, for example, shows these little things, but they don't seem to be negative or horrible.
But it's just interesting because it's an understanding of the world of spirits that these things are amongst us.
Absolutely.
And we can't perceive them, obviously, but in some states people can. Like the reports you're describing, these are the altered states where people see these things that are ubiquitous. They're around us.
They're absolutely around us, and they're consuming us. They're using us. And this is something that Nick wrote.
Not me.
Oh, yeah? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Everyone's like, not me.
Yeah.
I don't have any of those filthy things on me.
You put on those glasses where you can see and they're like just covered in them.
Yeah.
That terrible porn you were looking at last night? Yeah.
Excuse me.
I'm not saying you. I'm just saying I'm saying to the listener. I'm not saying you. I'm just saying to anyone that's like, oh no, I don't have them. Oh, yes, you do.
The only porn I look at is in the plus extension coming up. And it's all kosher.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
Believe me.
Okay, so let me just bring up this one as well. So in the book, where is it? I'll just bring it up here. Actually, no. I'm going to move on from the Lover's Lane because I kind of just brushed on that before. That's not really important. The Hat Man shows up in a lot of these experiences as well. I'll link to that in the show notes where you can read into that in greater detail. What this brings me to, though, right? This is where I headed with this, heading into the hitchhiker phenomenon, was actually an interview that was conducted with Dr. Jim Segala, who was talking to Paul Sinclair from Truth Proof. Now, we've covered some of Paul's books on the show before. I think he's got a collection of them. He also has an online database on his website where people go in and report their experiences. A lot of the experiences are things that are probably not that out there. There's definitely some that stand out. But a lot of them are just like, seeing lights in the sky, that kind of stuff, but well put together database. And I was listening to this interview with Jim, and I've actually taken just a couple of clips out from it because Jim is doing some really fascinating research. Now, before we get into the research that he's doing in the Unitah Basin with these detectors, these instruments, I want to actually first go back to where this all started, because all this started with Skinwalker Ranch. Pardon me. I mean, the phenomenon of the Hitchhiker Effect, when you raise that, most people will say, oh, that's from the Skinwalker Ranch. But this stuff is old hat. As long as paranormal phenomena has been around, people have been experiencing the Hitchhiker Effect, but it's never really come to people's attention except for all the stuff that happened with Skinwalker Ranch. And of course, you had the DIA, other government agencies, the American military, the CIA. They were commissioning people to go into the Skinwalker Ranch after all the high strangeness that was occurring there and to do investigations into it. And you had people like George Knapp, the great journalist and coast-to-coast reporter, amongst other things, going in and reporting on this, on the experiences that people were having. But I'll leave George actually to explain where the Hitchhiker Effect started, and we'll go from there.
No, he's not playing.
In one particular instance, there were these very seasoned intelligence officials who, as part of the Bass OSAP program, went to the ranch to check it out for themselves. They're walking in the middle homestead. At night, it's cold and suddenly gets much colder. They hit a cold spot where the temperature drops dramatically in a matter of seconds, and they were sort of on high alert. In fact, these guys were on high alert the whole time they were on the ranch because they'd read and heard about it. And they encountered some sort of an intelligence that had a sort of a menacing presence. It sort of froze them in their tracks. They backed off, and later when they went home, they had an eruption of paranormal activity in their homes.
So in a crux, that's what the Hitchhiker Effect is. And it was 5 out of 5 of these intelligence officials or intelligence members. They had gone and they had experiences with strange wolf-like creatures, orbs, cryptids, portals that were opening, strange black horrible creatures emerging. There was one particular incident where, if you recall, Ben, there was this evening where they had gone out, and when they had gone out, they had a pair of binoculars with them, and they were kind of exploring. I think this was Com Kelleher that reported this, was directly involved in this, but there was something that appeared in a tree. It was like this black mass, this black shadowy mass.
And it dropped to the ground.
And it dropped to the ground.
Morphed and started running.
Well, before that happened, though, the guy that was with him pulls out his binoculars and he starts looking at this thing. And it's in these reports here, which I'll link to, and he starts looking at this thing. And as he's looking at it, it's like he's overwhelmed. Like he suddenly has this complete overwhelming feeling where he's being controlled. And he actually says this. He says, I'm being controlled. Like, I don't know what to do. It was taking over me, until the thing kind of releases it and just runs away. It was almost like it was demonstrating that it has the ability to do this. And this becomes actually very important when we start looking into the work of Jim in a moment with what's going on. But with some of these incidences of where you had these personnel whose families were starting to be affected, it got just weird when it started. It just started being weird. Like, for example, take a listen to what was happening to some of the families. This is what George describes.
But there were other things that happened in the home. Beings, shadowy figures seen in the home, things moving around on their own. Their pet had been moved. They found their dog up on the roof one day. All kinds of trickster type activity. And then it spread from the kids to their friends in the neighborhood.
So this was that
That's weird.
This is R03 factor, right? It's like how many people spread the phenomenon to somewhere, and that's exactly what was happening. So there was a man who was working on this, who was at Skinwalker Ranch. He comes home, he gives it to his wife. His wife then gives it to the kids. The kids give it to their friends. And what the friends were saying is like there were kids that were saying, raven-like creatures were being seen through their homes. Orbs were seen in the like blue orbs. These blue orbs are really important, were being seen floating through their backyards. These are kids who have got no knowledge of anything. They're not connected to the family apart from being friends with the kids. They don't know that their father is their friend's father is involved in the military, is out there on Skinwalker Ranch, and yet this stuff, as you can see, like a virus, like an epidemiological trace, is moving through people. But a dog on the roof, and this is what other people were reporting. Like there was one guy that said he woke up one morning, couldn't find his dog. He finally, and like the house is locked. The house is completely locked up. There's no way that his dog could get outside. he opens the door and finds his dog had suddenly just kind of reappeared, traumatized. How is this happening? Why putting dogs on roofs? Like, why is it doing this? But it seems like it has this intention to not only get the attention of people, but also to intimidate. Because it seems like in doing so, it generates more of this fear, which apparently is what it's feeding on to get this. But it can be very destructive. Like, there were some very destructive effects. There was one woman whose life was essentially destroyed by going out to Skinwalker Ranch.
There was a female agent, a very seasoned, battle-hardened professional who encountered something with Colum, and he can tell you about it. They encountered some kind of a creature, a crypto creature that people have dubbed the Dino Beaver, again, in the Middle Homestead. This woman, when she goes back home, it's an immediate explosion of what you could call poltergeist-type activity. Not saying it is poltergeist, it's just similar to that kind of activity that's been reported over the decades by poltergeist researchers in her home. A wine bottle flies across the room, from one side of the room, smashes on the wall on the other side. There are beings that she sees at the side of her bed, things moving around in her home. It was so dramatic that her roommate, who was her fiance, moved out, ended that relationship.
So that's, pretty extreme, that it's like, it's not even about you. Your relationship breaks down because you've got a poltergeist in your home after going out to Skinwalker Ranch. Like, this stuff is becoming intense. Like, it's creating this emotional energy and it must be feeding upon it. Then, of course, you get to the other element, and this is where Colum, and by the way, I did briefly look up the Dino Beaver. I didn't want to dig any further because there's a whole range of things there that it's not what you expect. So I didn't go any further on that, but I'm assuming it's probably what some people often describe at Skinwalker Ranch and this region, that you get these chimeric type entities that people encounter. And I'm assuming that this was some type of dinosaur reptilian looking beaver, I suppose, or it could be anything else. But then, one thing that came out was that, well, it wasn't just seeing things and people having relationships break down. It was that people were actually being physically attacked by these things. And one of the sons of one of these men describes waking up in the middle of the night and being attacked by a bunch of orbs. Colum Kelleher describes it.
One of the Axelrod kids got besieged by orbs one night in 2011 and woke up with physical marks on his body. There were a lot of red welts on his body. It looked like, frankly, it looked like he had been beaten up after a night in which there was a lot of this quote unquote paranormal activity in his house and in his bedroom.
He got beaten up. He got beaten up by a bunch of orbs. Like, what are these things doing?
Just kick their faces off.
Well, look, and you could go, well, look, this is an isolated incident. But no, actually, there were other reports as well. So you've got biotechnologist Ron Becker. He was involved in the investigations of the ASAP team. They were out on Skinwalker Ranch for extended periods of time. And that's the other thing. It's like the more time you spend there, it seems like the more likely that you're going to get a transmission of this phenomenon, whatever it may be. But he describes that he and his daughter were traveling on a bend outside Oregon. This was May of 2005, when apparently the daughter noticed 3 blue-colored objects moving randomly in a field that was next to the highway. Now, these objects, after obviously it got their attention, quickly flew towards the vehicle. One went in front, one went through the car, one flew across the dashboard. But one of them, as it was flying around, entered Ron's shoulder, maneuvered through his thoracic area, and exited his other shoulder as his horrified daughter watched. Ron Becker subsequently came down with a constellation of medical symptoms and medical problems as an exposure to this thing. It doesn't end there. When she returned home to Connecticut, she actually shared a location with 3 college roommates, and a paranormal frenzy erupted in their home, with the friends describing waking up to dark, shadowy humanoid figures crashing over their beds, poltergeist activity in the home, heavy footsteps trudging up and down the stairs at night. And Becca and her friends had never experienced any type of activity before the experience with the blue orbs. So here you go. It's like the father, then the daughter, then the daughter's friends. This stuff is traveling. And I'm sure if you dug even deeper, you would then find that family members of the daughter's friends also had experiences as well. And it's always the same kind of thing. It's like,
do you have to the people that it's transferring to, do you have to talk about the activity? Do you have to mention to them what you're working on,
No.
what you've eyewitnessed?
No, and that was the case of the kids, right? This is what's really strange about it. So the sons of Axelrod. So Axelrod was a name of one of these intelligence people that was involved in this, but That's the name that the Pentagon, made them use because it's like a pseudonym for whatever name it was. But his sons, when their friends were describing their experiences, right? So the son, the one who was beaten up by the orbs, he didn't tell anyone about it. Obviously, he's not going to go to school and say, hey, last night I was beaten up by a bunch of light bulbs, moving through my room. But his friends were like, I'm seeing dog-like creatures. I'm seeing, bird-like creatures. I'm seeing orbs and blue lights floating through my backyard. These kids had no knowledge at all. So it's like, this is what's important about this stuff, because one of the arguments that's put forward about the Hitchhiker Effect is that it's actually social contagion. That it's like, well, you start describing experiences, and then for whatever reason, people start interpreting completely normal sensations and normal experiences as paranormal, and that's how this becomes a social contagion. And I can see why people would say that, because absolutely that can occur. This seems to be that it's absolutely an isolated incident each time. That it happens, there doesn't seem to be any path of transmission, and yet it seems to be occurring. What you'll make of that, I don't know. But it might tie into, just the phenomenon itself. And this is where Colum actually describes that, yeah, we know it from Skinwalker Ranch. This stuff has been happening as far back as Kenneth Arnold.
It is not only Skinwalker Ranch. It is not sort of only happening on Skinwalker Ranch, but a lot of UFO activity does seem to give rise to the Hitchhiker Effect. For people who have never been on Skinwalker Ranch and just interact with the UFO phenomenon, they themselves, in some cases, report elements of the Hitchhiker Effect. It's kind of ironic, but going all the way back to 1947, Kenneth Arnold, when he saw those 9 objects in the sky over the Cascade Mountains in June of 1947, it's interesting, long after he died, his daughter went on a radio show. She was talking about writing a book about his life, but she started talking about seeing orbs in the Arnold home. They had experienced various poltergeist effects.
It's exactly the same as and what's with these orbs? Like, why does it seem to be that these orbs are is it the way that they just initially manifest? Are they almost, if you're thinking about it from a biological sense, is this the paranormal pluripotent stem cell of which all the other phenomena will spew from? And the reason why I say that is because when you talk about the Hitchhiker Effect, there is a very broad spectrum of reports. People experience orbs seem to be common, but they also experience cryptid-type creatures, and not standard cryptid-type creatures. It's like really strange chimeric-type creatures that seem to be unique to a certain strain, as it seems to follow through a group of people. But it's always isolated to that same, you can almost map it through a group of people. So it's not like every single person's experiencing the same thing. They're actually experiencing in strands, I suppose, the same kind of thing, but in different locations and different reports, suggesting that there is actually something very real occurring here that is not a social contagion, which is not imagination. There's something else to it, and people are so reluctant to talk about it because it's on the highest end of high strangeness that they don't want to talk about it. There's a fear, there's almost a stigma attached to it, and you only have people that are working in this field going, hang on a second, a lot of people are experiencing this.
One thing that just occurred to me while you were describing that is we're talking about very negative, evil activity.
Yes.
And of course, if we think this is something that happens mechanistically, it's something that happens biologically, it would be true of the inverse, right? That if it's something positive, something heavenly, something righteous, this would also have that effect.
Yeah.
So if you encounter or you put yourself close to, upright, righteous phenomena, this will appear in the traditional term would be blessings. Like blessings are passed on to you and your family and those in your life. It's the same idea. It actually reminds me of I'm trying to Google the name of it, but there was that book on I think it was called The Secret History of Music, but I think I'm wrong. But the author, brilliant book on the kind of esoteric nature of music. And the author started with his personal experience where he was sitting down in a concert hall. I can't remember the composer that he was listening to, but it was a full-on orchestra. And when the music started playing, there was a moment in the start of the composition where it's like his psychic vision opened up, and he saw this kind of wave of very positive, heavenly, beautiful musical energy flow on from the orchestra through the crowd that was in the auditorium. But at the same time, he had this out-of-body experience where he kind of left his body and was looking down on the city and saw this same wave perpetuate out through the environment. And it was like that music was inspired by God, and it had this energy to it, and it radiated out across the landscape. What you're describing is really the same thing, but it's of an evil nature.
You know what? I wasn't even going to go here, but this is my personal opinion. But I think you really raised a very important point there, right? So you're right. Why is it that this seems to be necessarily evil? Like, it always seems to be dark, and it's going to get darker. I'm going to go into that in a moment. But it really is. It's dark and it's horrible. I'm like, well, it comes down to intention, right? And what's ultimately the intention? Like, what is it?
Were you talking about Skinwalker Ranch specifically?
Well, I'm talking about the Hitchhiker Effect, right? And the negativity attached to it, right? But
the intention of who?
Well, what's the intent of the people? Like, let's talk about Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's why I asked, because Bigelow's going there he wants to unlock technological advances. He wants to achieve his goals in business, in technology, and whatever else he's working on.
Ultimately,
space travel.
But even outside of Bigelow, but ultimately, you know what it all comes down to? Weapons. It's weapon technology.
I don't know if Bigelow's after weapons. He's a space guy.
Yeah, but no, I'm not necessarily saying Bigelow, but the CIA, the DIA, these intelligence agencies that are going to Skinwalker Ranch, they're pumping huge amounts of taxpayer money into this. Why would they do that? What's the return? Because it's about ultimately power and about weapons. And
weaponized dino beavers.
Well, it is, right? It really is. So, I mean, this comes from stories like Rosemary Ellen Guiley actually did some research many, many years ago where she was, she had a contact, and I think the contact's name was Jack, and it's obviously just some throwaway name, but I'll link to this in the show notes if I can find it. But I can't recall which book it was in, but I do recall that this Jack guy claims to have a contact with Saudi Arabia. Right. And the reason why he had a contact in Saudi Arabia is because he was invited to like a royal family dinner or something. And while he was there, he found a lot of military personnel, high-end, like high-up military personnel that were in cahoots with the Saudi, royal family. And the reason for this is that there was an agreement between the American government and the Saudis that the Americans could come in. And we know that there's I guess what you could call an alliance between the Americans and the Saudis. But I always thought it related to oil. But no, it was because according to this Jack, that the Americans were looking for the jinn. Because they wanted the technology of the jinn, right? And this is crazy, but what they wanted to go to these locations to get hold of this technology, because the technology is the jinn apparently were reported to have this handheld gadget that allowed them to pass through walls. And this is what the American military wanted. So they sent...
Wait, there were reports of jinn with handheld gadgets?
Handheld gadgets.
Like they have technology?
They had technology. They literally, according to this report from Rosemary Ellen Guiley, that they were looking for this. This is a report that came to her, right? So it's secondhand. But they were looking for this technology. And you can go, that's absurd. That's insane. Like, that's so ridiculous. But then why the hell is the American military and intelligence agencies at Skinwalker Ranch? They're not doing it to improve humankind. They're not doing it to raise everyone's vibrations and open up a portal when there's demonic entities. They're doing it to, well, exactly. They're doing it for harnessing
dino beavers.
The power of dino beavers. That's what they're doing it for. And that's why I wonder if this all is very negative. It's because the intent starts off being negative. It's not about raising people up. It's not about answering the big questions for humanity. Otherwise, they wouldn't send the intelligence agencies in. They'd send a bunch of scientists, like actual just civilian scientists in, physicists. They wouldn't be connected to three-letter agencies. That's why it's following these people home. That's why it's doing this stuff, right? And so,
so you're saying that if they went in there and they were like, we're going to research the Skinwalker Ranch demonic activity to serve humanity, that it would be different?
I think that it wouldn't have the same kind of power. It still appears to be demonic. But I wonder if...
Isn't it because the nature of what they're investigating is demonic?
Well, I don't know.
From the get-go?
But is it, though?
What difference does it make what their intentions are?
Well, think about it. What you just described, right, of this mechanism, of this yin and yang, right? If they go in there with the intentions of, looking for... Is it quite possible that they have something more positive come through rather than negative?
Well, no, because I mean, all the activity at Skinwalker has always been pretty evil.
Yeah, for the most part, it has.
It's not like they're going in and investigating light beings and, like
Well, they are.
spiritual, kind of high spiritual activity. It's not like they're investigating visions of the Virgin Mary.
No,
they're going in and seeing like horrific cattle mutilations. I mean, that's really what started Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, with the Shermans. Yeah, there was cattle mutilations that were going. It did start pretty dark, so maybe this is something about this particular location. Right?
Is there like a division of the X-Files, the real X-Files, if it exists, that does the good stuff?
Yeah,
like
you gotta wonder.
You get a promotion and you go, do the Virgin Mary apparitions and stuff like that, the miraculous healings.
Yeah, I mean, the sad part is it does seem for whatever reason that the negative forces are more powerful. It seems to be that way. It seems like the entire phenomenon itself, it just seems to be more powerful. The negative side of it. But maybe that's just simply because we hear more of the negative stuff because it's just so terrifying. Maybe that's why it manifests more easily. I really don't know. But what is happening, right? So you've got people that I think have better intent. And even Bigelow, I'm not bashing Bigelow, right? Because with Bigelow, he's an interesting character. There's been a lot of stories out there about Bigelow and exactly what he was doing, but he was always very hush-hush about what was going on there. And I understand that because he's investing his own money. He's not investing government money. He's put his own money in there. He's doing it for aerospace technology. I think it was a rather fool's errand in doing so because there's no way you're going to be able to harness freaking demonic werewolf creatures to get you into space.
It's almost like that's an excuse and the guy's just mega rich and is very interested in UFOs.
Yeah. Well,
it's like... Of course he's going to go looking for it. If he's got the money to spend,
do you know what,
why not? I don't begrudge him that at all.
I think ultimately it got him. And there was something that was said by, I can't recall if it was Jim Segala or Colm Kelleher, but regardless, there was this quote that I heard today is that, and I actually wrote it down. What did I write down here? I said, I didn't say what I wrote down was that Bigelow found something and it terrified him, and he didn't want to tell the world what he had found, right? And it just so happens
that's Bigelow there in the red.
Yeah, well, it just so happens that I think after around the time that he gave up, I think his wife died of an illness. So, like, is there a connection to that? No,
well, you've got a clip here.
People get sick all the time. Well, this is the thing, right? So, only recently, Bigelow was actually interviewed by the great Jeffrey Mishlove. And I'll just play a little part of this clip because he actually talks about, you're going to have to switch over to the videos, Ben, to go to number 1. We'll come back to the audio. But in this, he describes this sensation of almost like he was being, or other people were being controlled when they were trying to photograph phenomenon occurring. Just take a listen.
I would have somebody ready with a camera and I would say to him, all right, now, when you just get the sense that you should, that the urge to go ahead and take that photograph and point it at a certain place, do it right then. Don't question it, just do it as you have that urge to do it, because something may be urging you to do it. And he caught some amazing things. One, an object lifting off of a dresser. One where the photons wouldn't go beyond the edge of the bed.
Oh?
Yeah. He was laying in bed and took pictures, and there's a dresser and a mirror on the wall, and 4 feet of space between the end of the footboard for the bed and the dresser. Photons stopped at the edge of the bed, and there was a very faint outline of something beyond. But those photons should never have stopped in that short a distance.
So the phenomenon is demonstrating that it's capable of warping the laws of physics.
Is he talking about the ranch there?
Yeah, this is inside the ranch. This is like the guy that he had one of his staff. He had him taking photographs. And as you heard in that audio there, he's like, if you feel compelled to take a photo, do it. But it's because the entities are pushing him and making him do it. Like, this is very dangerous. You're allowing something in that we shouldn't be interacting with. We shouldn't be allowing it in. And ultimately, he sold it. Like, he sold it and he left. And I wonder if like what happens to most people in the paranormal field is ultimately they get consumed by it in some way or another. Like, I wonder if it took from him more than he put into it, like more than he expected to get out of it. So then let's come back to the Uinta Basin, and you've got the research of Jim Segala. So Jim Segala deployed these electromagnetic and gravity sensing devices, 27 of them throughout the basin. I'll link to the full interview with Paul Sinclair from Truth Proof so you can go and watch it. But I'm just going to give you some of just the crux of this kind of stuff. But he noticed the hitchhiker effect as well. And when we've been talking about the hitchhiker effect up until this point, it's always well, I shouldn't say always, but for the most part, it's been about just experiencing phenomenon. Like you experience phenomenon. Some people had serious medical complications when interacting with this phenomenon. Just play number 6 for me, please, Ben.
They are people that have spent time in the basin, ended up going home, brought back something with them to other family members. Now, it doesn't affect them, but as they returned home, their family members had gotten seriously sick. And some of them actually got sick with a very particular blood disease, which is kind of rare. So there's a significant or a statistically significant amount of people that came back. There was a hitchhiker on them or associated with them, and they've had to live with this. So the answer is absolutely yes. And I think right now, 3 of the participants that we have in the study I associated with hitchhiker.
This is crazy. You've got people that are going home that are not affected themselves after having an experience in this Unitah Basin, but then they're giving blood disorders to their family members. Like this is not normal. And it's a rare blood disorder. Now, what did I talk about on a previous show and earlier in this show? What's blood? Blood is an energy source. And they're coming up with these strange blood disorders. And a lot of the time, yeah, it's cured, but in other circumstances, it's not.
It really points to the true nature of disease.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That there's some energetic element to it. Yep.
We've had many people report that people with psychic vision can see that behind an illness is an entity.
Yes.
And when the entity is removed, the physical body naturally clears up.
Yeah. Yep. Because it's no longer disrupting that energy or consuming that energy. Then it becomes a little bit more strange. So the whole point of this project, right, and I'll link to his website and the project and a whole heap of stats of what's going on. His conclusions are really unusual, but have a very profound implications for what happens with paranormal phenomena. But that will become apparent. Let me play something else for you. So he also points out this weird thing about rocks and crystals being taken from these locations.
A lot of the times people will come back from a hike and they have nothing happen to them. I mean, hey, everything is great, and I won't get anything on their instruments. But a few times what will happen is that they'll come back with something and then they'll admit that they found this interesting looking crystal and they brought it back. A lot of the times what they're doing is they're actually interacting with the property as opposed to just viewing the property and just kind of being part of it. They'll actually pull something or they'll break a rock off or something like that. And then the instruments will go crazy. They'll have these problems. They'll have these nightmares. They'll have everything. And then one of the interesting things is that when they bring it back, that things level out. I mean, and you could say, well, that's crazy. Like, how can that possibly be? And if it happened once or twice, I'd say, yeah, you're right. That's not, but it happens a lot.
That's the old cursed travel
It's the sorry
story.
stones. It's the sorry rocks and Pele's curse. So there's 2, and apparently there's more of them, but there's 2 of them really stand out. It's Ayers Rock or Uluru here in Australia, that if you take a rock from there, that people will go home and they'll have, terrible things happen to them. Their lives will break down. They'll fail in exams,
You got to return it.
Yeah, you have to send it back. And when you send it back, the phenomenon stops. It's the same with Hawaii. If you take sand or lava rocks from Hawaii, apparently the same kind of things happen and people send it back.
Lyle Watkins had a bunch of stories of those cases.
Yeah, Lyle Watkins. Tim the Yowie Man's actually got a write-up on the Ayers Rock reports from here, so I'll link to that as well so you can check it out. But this stuff, like as he's pointing out there, Jim, that this is not just a once-off thing. It's not a couple of times. You hear it all the time. And it just so happens George Knapp, when he was hanging out at Skinwalker Ranch, experienced something very similar when he tried to take something home.
I tried to make this happen for a long time. I would bring things home from Skinwalker Ranch to my house, try to engage whatever it was. Bits of rocks and scrap and things taken from the homesteads, little tiny bits and pieces to try to get it going. And finally it happened and it wasn't pleasant. My wife saw these blue orbs floating over our house at night. She called me to come up and see them. By the time I got there, they were gone. And then there was an experience in our bedroom where this thing came in. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but it was a very frightening experience for her, unpleasant, and she didn't want it to happen again.
It was the same Bigfoot from that first story I told you at the start of the show. No, but this is the thing, right? So you can hear this. Like, this is a guy who is very knowledgeable about these sorts of things. He's bringing items, rocks, stones home from Skinwalker Ranch. The phenomenon follows with it. It's almost like a portable kind of transport for these things. And in the earlier report there from Jim, a guy picked up a weird crystal. What the hell do you think's going to happen? Like, you bring these things home, it brings the phenomenon with it. It's almost like it acts as, if you will, a touchstone, forgive the term, but it acts as a way to physically link you to the phenomenon. If you're not there long enough to be able to have something attached to you, well, then if you bring something physical back with it, then you're going to get these problems. So what's important about Jim's work is, as I was saying with these detectors, right, all throughout this basin, he's put 27 or so of these devices. I think there's in the images here, Ben, if you bring up image, I think it's image number 2. Let's just have a look. No, actually, sorry, just check the other image. Here we go. So in these images here, which I'll link to in the show notes so you can check it out for yourself, I'll link to the website so you can see it. Essentially, it just looks like a bunch of, ghost detecting devices, really, right?
But looks like an answering machine.
These are MUPAS devices, right? And these are instruments that,
I like this one.
Yeah, I mean, they become even more advanced. I think these are the more advanced ones that are placed all throughout the basin, but there are smaller ones that are placed in people's homes, and that becomes very important later on. But what this can do is detect changes in the environment, electromagnetic, gravitic, other physics forces, changes in the environment. So he deployed 27 of these advanced ones through the Utah Basin. And when you start tracking it, you can actually see a propagation wave of phenomenon. So if you just play for me, Ben, the audio, play number 9. This is Jim describing what he got from the data.
What happens now is that we'll see a propagation of these signals that start in one area of the basin and propagate over to another. So I'll see a gamma hit at 8 o'clock in the evening on this particular device. Maybe a few seconds later, I'll see a very similar, not exactly the same, but very similar looking shape to it, and another device that's a little bit more downstream towards, say, going south. And then another one would hit going south just after that, maybe 15 miles. So I look at this data and you could almost see the signal propagating all throughout these devices. Now, I don't have a tremendous amount of density. We're hoping to get a lot better, but hopefully in the future we'll have the ability and have enough devices out there so we can kind of map this whole thing. And maybe this whole idea of ley lines is actually real. Who knows?
So these are the shadow entities of the basin. Right? These are the creatures, and they move along these waves that they're actually affecting the environment. They are being detected by these instruments that previously haven't been used there.
Does he have enough data to map this out on an actual map?
Yeah. Yeah, the
Okay.
stuff starts being mapped out. Now, as you heard in the audio there that he's just, trying to start this, but he's getting kind of
You don't have an image of that.
I don't have an image of that, right? But what becomes more important is I rather want to focus on the personal experiences, right? And this is exactly what Jim's done. So what he's done is that he's got these people that have been in these locations, that have had these experiences and have come home, and that experience has followed them home. In the classic Hitchhiker Effect, he's put these devices in their homes, right? So many times when people describe these experiences, you can go, you're crazy, you're hallucinating, you're seeing things, all the cynical things, the excuses can come up. Now we can measure it, right? Now you start looking at the data. So just play this one for you. This is a person who described having an incident when there was one of these detectors placed inside their home.
There are a lot of people that will see shapes going. So I had one anecdotal thing that happened not too long ago. Somebody that actually was a hitchhiker. They said that they were sitting there and they saw an entity cross the room. Normally you'd say they were just sitting there watching TV and they felt that there was a presence. They turned around and something went right across the room. So normally you hear that from somebody and say, well, okay, that's interesting. But then I look at the data that their device had, and sure enough, they had a tremendous amount of electromagnetic energy enter their house at the exact moment.
That's interesting.
This is cool.
But wouldn't you argue that it's the increase in electromagnetic energy that's causing them to see the apparition?
Well, absolutely, right? But it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, because it's like, is it that there's a sudden surge of electromagnetic energy that simply allows them temporarily to perceive the reality that really exists?
Well, we know that the argument would be it's a hallucination.
Right, and that's the thing. And he's described this. He said in some of his early, and I don't have the audio for it, but he does describe in some of his early, and I think he has a PhD, don't quote me on that, but in his early neurobiology studies or something similar to that, they would have patients that they would put inside machines and they would fire some type of gamma rays or something like into their brain. And in doing so, these subjects, I'm sorry, they're not patients, they're subjects of a study, would start saying things like, oh, why do you guys have pizza? Like, what's
right.
And it was because they didn't have any pizza.
Yeah, it's the whole passenger God helmet scenario
Exactly.
where you can induce visions.
Yeah. And
so therefore, this is their logic. Therefore, all these sightings are induced hallucinations.
I don't think Jim believes that, right? And this is where it starts tying back to, this is why I mentioned implants before and affecting people's brainwaves. Because when you go back to Greer and the witness there, Paul Alec, whatever his name is, he was saying that, well, we got to the point with our research that we realized that we could actually take waveforms from people's minds, like from these, like through these waveforms. So they could basically read people's thoughts from these implants, but then they could also do the reverse and put, waves in and get them to behave in certain waves. So I'm like, is this why the military and the intelligence agencies were so closely looking at places like the Skinwalker Ranch? Because imagine if you could get these entities and harness them to be able to influence people to do things. Like, that's the ultimate.
Yeah, it's
weapon.
mind control technology.
It's mind control. That's the ultimate. You don't need to have wars. You don't need to have propaganda or anything like that, because if you can control if you can control an individual, you can control a populace. But that's the biggest thing that's going on here. So that's why they were looking for it. It gets even more wild, though, with the research of Jim, because it's like, yeah, is it? But then how many people, right, have a sudden, like, this is the thing. How is it so coincidental that you just happen to have a massive surge of electromagnetic energy into your home while you're seeing a shadow person? It's like, where's it coming from? Where are people having just random surges of electromagnetic energy in their homes that they're like, oh, I saw a shadow person? Like, no, I think it's more likely that shadow person is creating that electromagnetic effect. And this person is sensitive to it because they've already been initiated while being out at this location. It's like it sets them up, it primes their brains, it sets them up to be able to experience it. And the reason why I say this is because I haven't included them here, but when you look at many of these hitchhiker effects as well, what really stands out, and we might go into some of these more exotic cases on Tuesday on the Plus show, is that people start being very quiet. Like I was telling you before, they're reluctant to talk about their experiences, very much like Jazz, right? They don't want to talk about their experiences. They don't want to tell family members because family members will think they're crazy. But it's like people start seeing disembodied reptilian claws, for example, that are groping about in their houses or in their rooms, and they're all freaked out about it, but don't tell anyone. And then their kids or their partners later on go, oh, I've been really scared because there's a disembodied reptilian hand that's like clawing the bed in the middle of the night.
Give me the dino beavers any day.
This is not, simply a hallucination that's being induced by a sudden cell tower, firing a bunch of electromagnetic waves at your house. And it's also, you could go, yeah, maybe that's possible. One thing that was put forward is apparently the Skinwalker Ranch has high tension power lines near it. And some people from a skeptical standpoint have gone, well, the high tension power lines are inducting something electromagnetically in people's brains, and this is why they're seeing stuff. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't buy that. It's too exotic.
Yeah, I mean, with that argument, and I'm just playing devil's advocate when I'm mentioning these logical arguments, you've got to come back to the question of, well, why do people keep hallucinating demons?
Yeah.
Like, why aren't they seeing flying spaghetti monsters or
unicorns,
like little clown cars? Why is it always dark shadows and twisted werewolf-like creatures and things that have classically been archetypes of evil?
Yeah, and jinn.
Yeah, it's just I keep throwing out this idea that it's like induced by EM, but I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that's the case either. Going back actually to Rosemary Ellen Guiley, she called the jinn the true terrorists of the world. Like, this is what these things are, and because they're dark. They're as ubiquitous as human beings, and they exist on a dimension which is just next to ours. And and they shapeshift, and this is what a lot of people see, and they hate us.
Inshallah.
Well, yeah, they really hate us. So then, right, this is the really cool thing that comes out of this.
Yeah, bring us home. We're nearly an hour and a half into this show.
So the last thing is, right, Jim puts these instruments inside the home of another person and monitors them for a long time. I don't know if it's months, but it's a long time. They don't have anything happen except there's this sudden spike on the graph. If you bring up this image, Ben, which you don't need to see if you're just listening to this, but basically it's just a standard graph which is showing this gamma radiation activity and microwave radiation activity inside the home. There's this very definitive peak that you can see at around midnight. It's around midnight. There is this massive influx of gamma radiation, according to the graph, that comes into the person's home. Well, as we find out from the audio we're about to play, this person woke up at 2 a.m. with a very strange feeling. Just play the audio for me, please, Ben.
So this is a particular situation where I recorded some data from a device where the individual or the participant said they woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and thought this was the only time that they ever felt that they were been abducted. Where this is a very rational person
sorry.
that is.
Oh, you ruined the best part.
I thought I was looking at the picture. This is the problem when you use the tag. When you use the tag of some nonsensical picture, put the image of the person that's talking.
Well, I did before.
What's his name?
This is Jim.
Okay.
And thought this was the only time that they ever felt that they were been abducted. And this is a very rational person that is a teacher and very well respected, and got scared terribly from this. And I looked at the data, and that's the data that I found that night at exactly the time that person logged that particular anecdotal information into the system, where the gamma spike happened at that exact moment.
Yeah, you can see the quote from them in the graph there.
Yeah, that's the money shot. I'm telling you, last night was such a crazy night. If I were ever to say that I was abducted, it would have been last night. It was the strangest experience.
And there is that huge spike.
Yeah, huge spike.
Concentration of gamma radiation at around midnight.
And that's the same gamma radiation which apparently was propagating throughout the Utah Valley, which is being monitored by these detectors. So this is even more wild, right? Which is why I'm going to follow Jim's work, because what Jim believes now through the data, right? This is the thing. It's like, it's not just belief. I say belief, but like he can back it up with stuff. Is that he believes within statistically, between a 5 to 6 sigma statistical accuracy, he can detect within 24 hours to 48 hours when someone is going to have an experience.
What?
Yeah. They're going to have an experience because they've
That's
got
big.
enough data now to see that you'll see a spike or you'll see something happen, and within 24 to 48 hours, they will have a paranormal experience or a high strangeness experience.
Throw that into an AI model, some kind of algorithm to make predictions.
He does. So if you go to his website, which is connected to experiencerstudies.com, he talks about the MUPAS anomalous phenomenon study.
What's the URL?
So this is experiencer-studies.com.
Can you slow down, please?
I'll just hang on a second.
Experiencer-studies.com.
Yep. And all the results of his experiences are in there. And funnily enough, guess what coincides with some of his research and what he's finding, the way that people are being damaged? Well, it's very similar to the Havana syndrome.
Oh, really?
It's the same kind of thing. But, and I've lost the tab here. I've got to look. It's on his website somewhere. But essentially, he's talking about AI being used to detect when this stuff is going to take place.
Wow, this is crazy.
So this is where it's getting really fascinating. Like, yeah, I mean, you can have all the stories you want talking about this kind of stuff, and it's spoopy stories and campfire stuff. But when we can actually scientifically start using the data to predict stuff, that's when it becomes really intense and really intriguing, because it's not just people telling stories. It's not just people hallucinating. It's not just people being drunk, like all those tropes that get trotted out. There is actually, this is it. Yeah, the MUPAS AI alert engine.
Wow.
So this is where
technology can help in these situations by giving the experiencer a notion of a forthcoming event that may trigger an experience. Yeah. Holy crap.
Over the past several years, an effort has been underway to provide experiencers with the ability to understand their experiences better. A technology was developed that learned how to predict an upcoming experience event and give some insight into the experience's content. To accomplish this was no easy task, yada, yada, yada. It's amazing. It's big data. Big data AI is being applied to this. And as you can tell here, it's not just shadow person experiences, it's alien abductions, it's all kinds of paranormal phenomena, which we may be able to predict utilizing this technology.
So you can sign up to participate in phase 2 of the study.
Oh, can you? I didn't see that.
So yeah, again, for you listening, experiencer-studies.com/MUPAS. But yeah, we'll pop this in the show notes. Let's sign up.
Yeah, I don't think I want to. I don't think I want to know.
Aaron.
No. We'll just leave that for the moment. We'll come back to that for another day. I'll definitely get in contact with Jim, though. I think I need to follow on with his research and see what's going on here. Look, I mean, I haven't dug enough into it to see exactly what's going on. I look at some of these detectors, and as I said before, like I know I was joking, but some of the smaller detectors just do look like little ghost hunting devices.
But surely if you're in the study, you wouldn't know that it's gone off Otherwise,
That's right. Then that would cloud, and
it would ruin the data.
Yeah, social contagion.
So it's not as fun as it sounds. You'd have to check on the data later.
Yeah, I don't think they know from what we're saying. But I have to say, like talking to Paul Sinclair, he came across as very coherent, very dedicated. I think he may be onto something here. So I'll link to all this. There's going to be a big list of show notes, but all of it will be in the show notes at Mysterious Universe.
I want one in your house, but only I can see the data.
Well, maybe. I have been having, as I've told you over the years since we've moved up here, I've had a collection of strange experiences, but oddly enough, everything has completely died down. So I don't know why that is. Maybe it's consumed me to
boost up your EM.
Yeah, maybe.
Did you sell an old TV or something that was just like charging up your house with electromagnetic energy?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't even think I've removed anything. I still have all weird artifacts, so I don't know what's going on there. But yeah,
that was cool. Really good stuff. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's intriguing.
Really fascinating. Well, coming up in our Plus extension, My Paranormal Life by Dan Harari, supernatural stories from a Hollywood insider. Again, this is the guy that was saved by a gargoyle. At least that's what he thinks happened. And this intriguing connection with his father, who it wasn't until after his death, his father died in his 80s or 90s, that Dan dug into the family archives. He found some old documents. He found some old military documents that showed just how involved his father was in the Cold War, and especially the technology advanced technology divisions. Some really fascinating stuff coming up, along with some really kind of funny stories. This guy's a funny character.
There'd better be at least some sex in here. It's got to, you warned us, Ben.
Thunder Chungus coming up. Exclusive to Plus. Head to mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. You get access to the big extensions we do every single Friday. And of course, if you're a Plus member, you get an exclusive show every single Tuesday as well. And Plus members get an entirely ad-free version of the show, higher bitrate feed for your MP3s. And if you sign up for MU Max, you get access to our life's work of Mysterious Universe going back to 2007?
2009. 7. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
2007, 2008. So tons of stuff on there. mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. $9 a month. Help support your favorite show. That's a wrap for this free edition of MU. Thanks for listening. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week.